Welcome back to My Book of Mormon with me, David Michael. This is episode 38, and we finally have our second Mymo special. This will be Mymo Special 2.0. And today we are joined by the original Prophet Matthew Timion. So welcome, Matthew.
Thank you.
So yeah, I've been looking forward to this for a while. It's been a long time coming. I was hoping to do these about every 15 episodes or so obviously we're a little bit behind, but so happy to have them. And we had originally planned for some others to come, but I guess due to some scheduling conflicts, it's just going to be me and Prophet Matt. I think that's all right. Can I call you Prophet Matt, or do you like...
You can call me anything you want.
Oh, come on now. All right, fine. Well, Prophet Matt's easier to say.
All right.
So here we are. So we have... Man, there's quite a bit of material that we could go through, because what was the last Mymo special we did? My goodness, we were pretty far back in the book.
Yeah, I think you were in First Nephi still.
Wow, it seems like forever ago.
Think.
Seems like forever ago. So yeah, I gotta say, probably the first thing I want to talk about, just because it's so fresh in mind, is this crazy chapter 14 in Alma. That was nuts. So
right.
Yeah. So my couple questions I have about it. So I did realize, and this is actually someone posted this on the website and kind of explained this whole Nehor religious difference between the Nephi religion, I guess is what you would call it.
Right, yeah, the Nephite religion run by Alma the Younger, which you've been calling him Alma Jr.
Yeah.
In the typical Mormon church, they refer to him as either Alma the Younger and his father being Alma the Elder, or just Alma. And so that's how they distinguish the two. Got it. Because they're both named Alma.
Yeah, they are. Confusing. And, yeah. But it really was. And I actually just looked it up. The last Mymo special we did, we were in the middle. We had just started Jacob, so actually we were through the Nephis. So there you go. So everything from Jacob on is on the table to talk about. So yeah, I think that the confusing things, and no one really responded to this because I was really confused with, oh God, what's his name? Alma's preaching buddy.
Amulek.
Amulek, thank you. Right. So when Amulek stood up and was just bragging about how rich he was. I mean, he was like, I'm famous, I'm rich, I have lots of friends. And so some people were like, don't worry, he gives it away later. But that wasn't the crime. The crime wasn't being rich, is that he was just blatantly boasting about it. So that's what I thought they were upset about, because they're like, you've broken our laws, which I had to agree with. He really did. So that one, I don't know. It felt like he had committed this horrific act, this terrible sin, and it just didn't seem like anyone, like the book itself, never called him out on it. So what are your thoughts on how Amulek can still be considered this righteous man when he never, I don't know, he didn't even seem to repent for doing that?
It's interesting because I at one point when I was a new convert to the church, I gave a talk to all these leaders because they were like, how do we get Americans to join the church? Because it was, it's a hard issue in America. And I likened myself unto Amulek. For some reason, I really like the story. And I've been looking back and I've been trying to figure out why. Because I can't remember exactly why he was so important to me. And looking back, I've been trying to read. I cannot find a single disagreement with him being a boastful rich man. Like, it just never came up. And so I think that it's been just kind of glossed over. I'm even looking at the Wikipedia page right now, and I cannot find a single mention of his boasting of his riches anywhere. I think the only reason it stood out for me was because when I think about Mormons, right, in the community, just ones that I'm aware of, and especially prominent ones, poverty is certainly not an aspect that you consider, yeah. Right? Yeah. And so that one always stood out for me whenever we were reading, and it would talk about, because as you know, one of the things that has always struck me as odd is that I don't think I've ever gotten a really good definition of what righteous means and what evil or sinful really means. And so when they do spell out rules, I tend to cling to them and say, there's an example. There's something that is a sin. And that was one that I just think was repeated so many times. And I always thought it was weird that so even just like wealth in general, being a rich person and being a, LDS member, how do people, I don't know, get around the very blatant, description of that being something that shouldn't be? Yeah, that's there is a point of contention with that within the LDS Church because it's spelled there in black and white. Being rich is bad,
Mm-hmm.
and not being humble. And there's a lot of lip service given to this. And there's I don't know if we've read it yet. I'm sure it's come up. This concept of wearing fine silks and costly apparel, and being very superficial and just all this kind of thing. But then you go to church and you see the nice suits and the nice cars, and there is. I was thinking about this yesterday. How about this? Mormonism is a very American religion, and with that comes the prosperity gospel, which is flourished everywhere, which is if you are righteous, meaning God likes you and you follow his commandments and everything, you doing what you're supposed to do, you will be blessed with material things.
Okay.
And since, this is it's a very American concept and Mormonism is a very American religion, they kind of go hand in hand. And so there's a lot of lip service about, giving and everything, but it is very understood in the culture that if you have things, it is because you're in favor with God. And so this results in a absorbent amount of credit card debt in Utah and bankruptcy in Utah, because everyone has to have the nice car and the nice house and the nice clothes, because it makes you appear to be in favor with God.
Yeah, All right, I'm going to get back to that in a second, but it just occurred to me that I didn't really do you the justice of letting you introduce yourself, and I just jumped right into this thing, and so I apologize. So why don't we pause for a second? Quite a few comments about this. I feel like I could talk about this for an hour. Hopefully I don't. It might get boring. But before we go any further into this topic, Prophet Matthew, tell all the Mymos about who you are.
Well, you've been talking about my book a little bit, and I did write it hoping that people could understand how someone becomes susceptible to joining Mormonism. And then that's really my story. When I was 18, I was baptized into the church. And there were a lot of factors that played into it. I moved across the country. My father had died. There was just a lot of bad luck in my life. And so I was just really looking for something to hold on to. And it presented itself. And there I was. And I got swept away in it. And so that was, and that's in the book. So I became Mormon when I was 18. When I was 19 and a half, I went on a mission to the Philippines. When I was 23, newly 24, I was married in the temple. Then a few months later, it all just came crashing down. Bad marriage, I don't know what it was. I think I attribute a lot of that to the fact that I was in college and I was taking some psychology classes and learning about the scientific method. And all of a sudden, I looked at the church from the outside and said, if I knew at the beginning what I know now, would I still believe it? And I realized that I wouldn't. So they teach you in a way, it's called line upon line or milk before meat. There's a lot of different colloquialisms for it. But they'll teach you these things one thing at a time, and they build up to something bigger. So by the time you get to the crazy stuff.
No,
sorry.
I'll beep it out.
Yeah. Well, I just remembered, you're not cussing on this one.
It's hard sometimes.
By the time you get to the crazy stuff, it doesn't seem so crazy anymore. And so when I was able to look at it from an outsider's point of view, I realized, I wouldn't have believed any of this stuff had I known about it from the beginning. So then I was able to really just look at the church critically, and it came crashing down pretty quick. And so then in all my wisdom, I eventually got divorced because really the only thing we had in common was that we were Mormon. And that's what happens when you propose to someone after knowing him for 3 weeks. And so then I left the church. I had my name removed from the records. But then I met someone else who decided to move to Utah because that's where every ex-Mormon should move to feel at home is, the belly of the beast. So I lived in Salt Lake for a good 8 years and, was highly involved with the ex-Mormon scene and a lot of the people there. And it was a very interesting time because we were all the people that I knew at the time, we were all just leaving the church. And so it was new and it was raw and we were trying to experience life and we did it very poorly a lot of times. And there was a lot of funny stories along with that. Just you got 40-year-olds that are drinking for the first time, and so they can't regulate it. And, just all these things that most people figure out in their teens are now these adults doing it. And so it's like a full-time Rumspringa of adults.
Rumspringa.
Yeah, because we're just experiencing life for the first time, and we've always been taught that, life is, or the outside world, the us versus them. The rest of the world is very, they drink, they smoke, they have sex, they watch porn, they do all this stuff. And so there seems to be an overindulgence in the initial leaving of the Mormon faith that I don't know if it's an open rebellion against the church or if it's just because that's the script they've been given about life outside of the church, and so they just play along with it, or a combination of both. But yeah, so that happened, and that takes people a while to recover from, if they ever do.
Right.
But yeah, so I experienced all that, and moved out of Utah 2 years ago because it was time to get away from everything going around.
And then you came to the promised land of Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Came to the promised land, and take the train to work every day, and it's great.
Yeah, so for anyone who hasn't visited Chicago, I've been all around the world. I think it's the best city on earth, but that's just me. I love this town.
It took me a while because, I moved from the West Coast to Chicago, and, anything on the West Coast, all the houses are far apart, and, you have all this room. And then I came to Chicago, and people are living in 3 flats on top of each other, and there's just people everywhere in your business constantly, and you can't escape it. And it took me quite a while to get used to that, but it's been a great change. Okay. Much better schools for my son, great place to live. Minus the winter last year, the weather's been great.
My God, that was... All right, let's not start talking about the weather. We're really bore people. Anyway, all I'm going to say is polar vortex. What the hell? All right. So thank you for that, and sorry we didn't open with it, but let's jump back. So the
prosperity
gospel, right? So the interesting thing is, like, Alma, just the character of Alma, and I actually think you could say this is true for senior or junior, or what'd you say? The younger,
Alma, the younger.
Is the other one called the older?
Or is he just Alma? Held it either Alma, or I believe I've heard it as Alma the Elder.
Okay.
But it's been 10 years since I've.
All right, fair enough. So anyway, either one of them, but especially the older, he was a socialist. There was no other way to describe that, right? Everyone should share everything with everyone, right? He was preaching that if it was possible for you to help someone, but you decided to keep that wealth, that was just, you're going to hell. Very, very kind of Marxist ideas, right?
Right.
Which is interesting because, as you pointed out, this is an American religion, and that just flies in the face of capitalism, right? That's just as anti-capitalist as you can get. And so capitalism is, quite frankly, grounded on greed, right?
Right.
If you don't want what your neighbor has, capitalism doesn't work.
Well, that kind of goes against the whole "thou shalt not covet" part,
right?
As well.
Right. Yeah, you have to covet, or capitalism is a failed system, right?
Well, yeah, and you think about it too, and this goes back more towards, let's work on the premise that Joseph Smith wrote the Book of Mormon himself, and these are not divinely translated,
mm-hmm.
and it's a product of the religious fervor in the 1800s, and there's revivalist meetings, and these traveling preachers, and just what people are talking about. And one of the theories is that a lot of these sermons that are in the Book of Mormon, like where Alma's talking about wealth distribution and helping the needy, they could have very well been motivated by a preacher he visited and listened to and said, that was a great sermon, I'm going to write it down, and he's going to incorporate it. And so if you think about these things in that context, that this could have just been lifted from some preacher talking about helping your neighbor in the early 1800s.
So I'm okay with, even if I say, no, this wasn't Joseph Smith, this really was translated, I could make this argument either way, right?
Right.
That it does require, I think, quite a bit of cognitive dissonance to have wealth, be a Mormon, read that, and somehow come to terms that that's okay. And also, let me be fair, Christians are just as guilty of this, right? This isn't just a Mormon thing. If you read Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, he said a lot of the similar things, right?
Right.
Give, don't stop giving, right? So But still, this is, how do they call it? The most correct book ever. So it's like, if you really in your heart believe this is the way to salvation, how do you read that? How do you read the message of Alma and say, yeah, it doesn't apply?
Well, here's actually, I was just thinking, there is a very easy way to mentally gymnastic yourself through this, and that is the original Mormon Church attempted to live the United Order, which is essentially communism with a theocracy, so a theocratic communistic society where they gave everything to the church and the church redistributed everything. And it was such a failure that they had to stop it altogether. And then
I could tell you almost went the wrong way with that F.
Yeah, it was such a failure that then they instituted tithing instead.
Okay.
And used that as like an analog to the United Order, and that the people just aren't ready for it. And so a faithful Mormon could read these words and say, okay, those were the commandments given to the people in the Book of Mormon, but right now we are commanded to live tithing.
Oh, okay. So it's kind of like, hey, they're describing a paradise that we haven't reached yet in humanity. That's interesting. Okay, then it helps.
That's the joy of having a living prophet, because God reveals what he needs to reveal to his people at that time. And so this worked for those people. Maybe they were more righteous, but what we have right now, this is what God has commanded us to do. And so we only have to follow the prophet now and what he tells us to do.
Got it. That actually makes sense. I'll cut that out. Appreciate it. But sorry, might have to cut out quite a bit of that. All right. So I get that. That does help. And now I can't remember what I was going to say.
Well, that really does make it so anything you read in the Bible or the Book of Mormon or anything ever, if it's ever contradicted and it doesn't make any sense to you, a person in leadership can turn around and say, well, do you believe that right now Thomas S. Monson is a prophet? And, well, yes, of course I do. Well, this is what the doctrine is now. And God does change his doctrine or give and take as see fit. Polygamy is an example of that. Blacks having the priesthood is an example of that. Just, there's little things, and you can see how it's changed over the years, but that's because we have a living prophet.
Hopefully in a few years we'll say the same about women in priesthood. But
then gays, and, pygmies, maybe, yeah.
Pygmies? Anyway, so let me talk about that. So when you were fully into this, right, did you actually think that the prophet, so Tom Monson, you said, that he would go into a room and God's just there hanging out?
Yeah, everything about that is just kind of based on folklore, because Mormons have developed this code of secrecy that they say certain things are too sacred to talk about. But I will imply that it's happened, but I won't give you the details. And so that allows you to say, if you've ever had a great experience with a prayer, you can allude to much more than you actually experienced and still not be lying about it. Well, regardless. And so I was told that in the Salt Lake City Temple, there is a room suspended in the air.
What?
Well, not like floating, but it's not touching the ground. And it's the Holy of Holies, and that is where the prophet alone can go talk with God or Jesus or anything like that.
So it's kind of the whole tabernacle setup from the Old Testament. So God's presence is in there in a physical room where he has to go.
Well, he can go there.
Can't you just see God in a smoking jacket and a big leather chair, just like, oh, Tom, how are you?
Joseph Smith saw, according to him, he saw God and Jesus in all sorts of places, whether it's the woods or, he had visions in the Kirkland Temple, which was really just like a chapel. So people were there, and Jesus was there, and Elijah was there, and, all these different prophets came and hung out with him, but no one else saw it, of course. And so Joseph Smith was able to see God anywhere. So really, the current prophets never talk about how they communicate with God. And it's really just implied that they do.
Yep.
And then along with that, you have the apostles, who for the longest time were recognized as special witnesses of Jesus Christ, which is understood to mean that they have seen him. But again, no one will ever come out and say, I have seen Jesus.
Yeah, even the Book of Mormon so far hasn't. A few times there was some descriptions of like an angel coming down, this kind of thing. But whenever it was God, and this has happened quite a bit with, who was it, Mosiah, I think, where it was just, you would just hear, and then the Lord told Mosiah X, Y, Z, and you're like, well, how did he do that? You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's, I don't know if that's intentional or if it's just, because even if you look at the Old Testament, it doesn't always have a mechanism by which God talks.
Right.
It's just God is talking, and it's either a voice in the sky or a voice in their head, or
there's hundreds of pages where it just says, and God said. You know what I mean? Like as if someone's sitting there just writing down the words of someone speaking in front of them. Yeah. So now I'll give it to you. It's. I mean, how do you communicate something that isn't actually happening? So it's difficult.
Yeah. Well, 100 years later, you tell people it happened, and that's
no way to falsify it. So fair enough.
And so but I did believe that at the time Gordon B. Hinckley was in direct communication with God. And a lot of that just comes to the naivete of myself, because if these people are apostles and prophets and it's understood that means that they have seen Jesus Christ, why would they lie about that? Because it is such an easy thing to be true or not. Yes, I have seen him, so why would I say I'm his witness if you really haven't witnessed him? And so, I'm like this 19, 20-year-old. Of course they're telling the truth, because it makes no sense to lie, because everyone cares about honesty and the truth and integrity.
Well, I won't go as far as to say that they're lying, right? It's possible. It's possible that they're frauds, that once you get up there and he goes into this room and he says, oh, there's no one here, crap, right? And so he just has to like perpetuate a lie. It's possible. But I think it's probably more likely that you believe that you're the chosen one, right?
Right.
So I think most likely Thomas Monson, in his heart, thinks that God chose me to be this person. And so anytime he has a thought, he assumes that's God talking to me, right?
There is that train of thought. There was an interview I heard on Mormon Stories. This woman, her father was best friends with Boyd K. Packer growing up. And so Boyd K. Packer is he's the senior most apostle. He will be the prophet if Thomas S. Monson dies.
Really? I thought that's established in advance?
Yeah, it's based on seniority.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. God's one true way of revealing things is
who's oldest?
Who's been in the club the longest.
Got it.
Yeah, but so this woman, and I can't remember her name for the life of me, but she grew up knowing Boyd K. Packer, and he would tell their family that he has figured out how to differentiate his own voice in his head, Satan's voice, and the Holy Ghost. And so he's able to figure out this is the Lord's will based on, I don't know, the tone of voice in his own head, or one sounds like Gollum and one doesn't.
Sure.
But yeah, so in that case, he probably literally believes that this voice in his head is the voice of God under certain circumstances.
Yeah. So he has an actual mental image of the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other shoulder. And
it's very, very possible. I mean, he's an interesting guy.
I mean, there's three options, right? He's either a fraud, he's convinced himself that it's true, or it's actually happening. So right. I think the second one is the most likely of the three.
Yeah.
And
all things being equal, I think it's a lot more likely that people want to believe so much because it's such a great story. I mean, it means the heavens are open and God talks to people and Jesus is real and you don't have to worry about sin and you can go to heaven.
No, okay, sorry, I'm going to totally change the subject now because I think this one's getting stale anyway. So you just mentioned people don't have to worry about sin, right? So this whole concept of Nehor, which by the way, fantastic name. Love Nehor. Anyway, every time I see
my girlfriend's nickname. Hey.
Okay, well, I'll let that one go. But funny. So he was this guy that said, hey, and the only thing I ever read, the only thing I really pulled out of it was that he wanted to pay priests. He thought they deserved that priesthood should be like a full-time job. They shouldn't work the fields. It should be a profession that they get paid for, right? But just this week, someone commented on, and I'm fairly certain it was a TBM. Actually, I am certain it was a TBM that commented. You can just tell by the language. I think it was on episode 34, if I remember correctly. Anyway, where basically said, dude, you missed the point, right? The point was not necessarily the paying priests. It was that he was saying that Jesus was going to come to save all the earth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the Nephite religion, they were prophesying or saying that no, redemption, you need to be redeemed or you need to repent, right? So in one hand, you have by default, everyone is going to return to heaven, right? And on the other hand, you have by default, everyone's going to hell, right? That's kind of the two different, it's a pretty major difference, right? You're either born evil, born good. Now, they both agreed that it was irrelevant until Jesus came, right? So Jesus was going to come and either pay for all sins or only for the sins of people that kind of accepted it, right? So this is a big difference. So that was like, oh, well, that's interesting, right?
That plays into this thing you've been caught up on in the last episode or two, where, I called him Ziezram, you called him Zizram. One of us we're probably both wrong on how we're pronouncing his name. And the whole thing, and this ties back, because he asked Alma, will people be saved in their sins? And Alma says no, because then God would be lying. And when you were reading it, you got very confused, and you were caught up on that because it said, will he be saved in his sins? And you interpreted it as from their sins, because that's the point of Jesus. But what was really happening here, and Ziezram is a lawyer, and he's trying to convolute things, and he's being sneaky. And so what he didn't say is, will people be saved from their sins? He said, will they be saved in their sins? Which means if you are continuing the sin, knowing it's wrong, you're not really repentant, and God's not going to come down and forgive you for that because you're still doing it, so you're not really sorry.
But did Nehor kind of say that was still okay?
Well, Nehor said that everyone would be saved.
Yeah, regardless.
Right. And so, I mentioned that only because it's been recent, and I guess it's not really a Nehor thing. Ziezram was called unto Nehor because he was practicing a quote-unquote priestcraft, which, pretty much all the lawyers and judges were considered to be practicing priestcrafts.
What does that mean?
I think that we looked it up once, or you looked it up in the show, and it made sense, but I was thinking about looking it up in the Bible dictionary. It's one of those words that really doesn't mean anything, except for what you want it to, kind of like righteous and good.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
So that might have not answered your question at all.
Well, it's just, I think it's interesting though, if those are the competing theologies, right? Because on one hand, and this is actually, let me look it up here. I'm going to say exactly how I responded to this comment, and it went silent. I thought I was going to be starting a conversation with this person, but he had no response for what I said. And maybe I was a little bit snarky. I don't know. But, let's see here.
Well, really though, while you're looking it up.
Here it is, got it.
The attitude is that if I'm saved from my sins, it's universal.
Right.
Saved. No, actually, that's backwards. I'm sorry. If you're saved in your sins, it's universal. Because regardless, if you're sinning or not, you're going to be saved. But,
and that semantic, by the way, I'm so glad someone explained it to me, because I think I could have read that 100 times and not really realized that they were saying different things.
Right.
So, yeah, I'm glad that was explained. But now that it makes sense. So, but my response was, so once he explained it, I said, okay, this is really helpful. And I said, so it sounds like the Nehor believed in an all-loving, all-benevolent God, whereas the rest of, quote, the true church believe that his benevolence has strict conditions. It's what it's saying, right? So if the Nehor believers were just like, God made a creation, and he realized that it was flawed, and so he's going to send, Jesus to kind of correct that flaw, right? We're gonna fix that, and then now his creation isn't flawed anymore. It almost makes the whole conversation about what is righteous, what isn't, irrelevant in that worldview, right? Where it's just we have an all-loving God that wants all of us to come home, and he's going to make it possible for that to happen, right? It's actually a pretty that's kind of a nice way to think about life, right? Just like, hey, live your life and do what's right for you and all this. You know what I mean? And a lot of people would probably say, "Oh my God, if that was what everyone believed, then there'd be chaos, right? Everyone would be robbing each other, murdering each other." But people think the same thing about atheists, right?
Right.
People often say, "Well, if you didn't believe in God, you would just go out and murder and rape people." And it's like, yeah, no, that doesn't happen. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
I've always said if the only thing keeping you from killing me is your belief in a 6,000-year-old book, then you frighten me.
You should be locked up.
Yeah.
You're a sociopath. Yeah. So I actually think that like it's a decent, kind of a nice way to look at it. I would love for that to be true, to be honest with you, right?
Well, and you're delving into something, and this has bigger undertones in Mormonism. Have you heard anyone talk about the premortal existence when it relates to Mormon theology?
Whoa, no, but I think you're
Okay.
about to blow my mind.
Boom. So the concept, and this is considered Nauvoo, high Nauvoo theology. So is when Joseph Smith and all the Mormons were in Nauvoo, he started like really incorporating new thoughts.
Everyone gets smarter when they move to Illinois, so that
Well,
makes sense.
it's true. It's the Mississippi air, but the the concept is that we lived before we came to Earth, and we were literally children, spirit children of our Heavenly Father. Now, in this pre-earthly realm, two people came forward, and I'm going to simplify it, and they presented a plan for saving mankind and progressing. And one of these people was
Got to stop you there.
yeah,
We were already saved in this existence.
premortal. This is before we have bodies,
Well, why did we even need a body?
because it's part of the way it's always been done. Because God did it.
Okay.
That's another thing too. God went through this whole plan himself, so it needs to happen.
But is
It's part
there
of the
like
plan.
when? Sorry, I'm getting nitpicky here. When did? Okay, so let's say we're just going to call it my soul, right?
Right.
So my soul, has it always existed? Did
Yes.
it always?
Now, in some form, the Joseph Smith was very keen on the idea that matter can't be created or destroyed.
Sure.
It's just reorganized, and so you could say that the premortal existence, there is no time. It's very possible to say that. We're speculating because when God sent us to Earth, He put a veil of forgetfulness over us, and that's why we don't remember it. But it's all speculation. But you could say that's a infinite time. No time has passed. Therefore, your spirit. Well, no, it hasn't always existed, because you were literally birthed. Your spirit was birthed from our spiritual or our heavenly mother and father.
So do Mormons believe in evolution then? Because it seems to fit in that, right? Like your soul existed when there was a supernova that created the heavy matter that eventually would become you. Like that's the whole. Or am I getting too off topic?
There's plenty of leeway in Mormonism for evolution to work.
Okay.
If you ignore certain prophets and apostles and what they've said, you can make it work in your head. And so there is enough room in there to make the two coexist.
Yeah.
But so it comes back to, in this premortal existence, Jesus presented a plan for us to come to Earth, to have sin, to repent, to follow the commandments, and to come back to God. And Satan, our good friend Lucifer, came forward.
Who I've been told was his brother.
No, it's everyone. We're all his brother.
Oh.
Because we're all literally birthed from the same Heavenly Father.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So Lucifer came forward, presented his plan, which was that everyone gets to return to heaven, and everyone will be forced to follow the commandments. And the big thing is Jesus wanted there to be free will and free agency. And so that was like the big difference in the plan. One was forcing, one was allowing people to falter and maybe not make it back. And so then there's the war in heaven, which, you'll remember from the Old Testament, a third of them followed Satan. So that's the idea, the Mormon idea of that, the war in heaven and them being cast out.
I actually don't think that is in the Old Testament.
I swear there's something in Genesis about the war in heaven, but
I could be wrong.
matter.
I thought it was more like Jewish folklore, but not actually biblical. But I might be wrong too. I've read the Bible all the way through, but it's been a while, so.
unlike the entire Genesis account, which is not Jewish folklore.
Oh, sorry. Fair enough.
Anyway,
touche, sir. Touche.
So when you hear about Nehor and his concept that there's universal salvation and everyone's going to be saved, it rings to Mormons like Satan's plan, which is that everyone's going to be saved, regardless of how you act or how you follow or where your faith is. And so this concept of free agency is so important for a group of people who all do exactly the same thing and dress all exactly the same and talk the same and look the same. But it's a very fundamentally important thing that we have the choice.
That we have the capability to fail, right? Essentially. It's crazy that if there's been one theme since I started this show, is I always seem to side with the bad guys. And I'm actually siding with Lucifer on this, right? There are ways to do it. I mean, you could create a universe where you can have free will, but why do you need the commandments? Why are they even necessary?
Right.
Why is it, you know what I mean? Like, here's a great example. I have children, right? I have physical children. And yes, there are rules that I give them, but there's no rule that they could break that would make me kick them out of the house, never to return. You know what I mean?
Right.
They have free will. They absolutely can do whatever they want, but my love is unconditional. I will always be there. I will always be their father. I will never turn them away. I can't think of a thing. Even if they committed heinous acts and were in jail, I would still love them. You know what I mean? Like, you can't undo that.
Well, yeah, I look at it I was thinking too, as a father, and anyone who has been a father or a mother or a parent would know that a lot of times it would be a lot easier if I could control my son and make him do certain things, because I have a pretty good idea of what he should be doing. Like, he shouldn't be doing drugs. He should be studying, he should be doing charity work or, whatever it is. There are certain things he should be doing. And I almost think an infinite loving God would probably know a lot better what we should do and almost force us to do it. Because, this is me siding with Satan.
I know where you're going with this, but this is how I think we're on a different page here. What I'm saying is, even if he's not doing what you think he should do, right? Or even what universally he should do. Let's say, just take opinion out of it. You'll forgive him. He's still my son.
Yeah.
You'll forgive him regardless, even if he's not sorry. Even if he continues to do it, you're not going to stop loving him. You'll never reach a point where you say, I never want to see your face again. It's just because you love your child, right? And so that I think is a difference. God created a world, or maybe it was Jesus, whoever. Someone created a world and put beings that they claim to love in it, right? And by default, I mean, this is how that Adam and Eve story is described. They had to sin, right? They had to actually come short. So by default, they would never return. These children that he loves, you are now damned, right? So it's almost like looking at your kid and saying, okay, I gave birth to you, and when you turn 12, right? Let's just throw a number out there. I'm going to kick you out on the street, and you're going to suffer a horrible life unless you follow all these rules that I have for you, right?
Right.
What kind of parent would that be? That'd be a parent that goes to jail, right?
Right. That would absolutely be child abuse. It would be creating an indentured servant out of your child.
Yeah. So I don't see the difference. I don't see how that equates to free will being some nice thing. It seems like just an awful description of what God is. God, even at the fundamental level, sounds horrible.
And yeah, you're running into things that, and this is what really drives me crazy about the LDS culture, is that everything is so semantic. And so I can say to you, that doesn't sound like a loving God. And then they could reply and say, well, he does love you, so you should follow his commandments. Well, yeah, but he doesn't love me if...
Right, that's cart before the horse, right?
Right. There's a lot of back and forth going on, and everyone has their predetermined or predefined notion of what love is and how you show it, and so you're never going to meet in the middle there.
So it's
And so,
it's a
yeah.
presuppositionalist view that God loves you, and so we have to, since that's a fact, we have to make the evidence match that in any way we can.
With that, I was just thinking about this notion that you are more favored if you follow the commandments, which is, a general Christian idea. It's not unique to Mormonism.
Mm-hmm.
It explains why when people leave the church or they come out as gay or, become a Democrat or something, that their family will shun them, kick them out, disown them. And it seems to be happening less and less as the time goes on because the whole world is collectively becoming more accepting. But if the model we have to base our life on is God, and God loves you based on your obedience, then how is that different than a parent loving their child? If they're not following the commandments and living the gospel, then I'm just going to kick them out.
Oh, no doubt. That's why I think it's a horrible view of God. It just seems very dangerous for all of the reasons that you just suggest. I mean, I call out when I read things that seem dangerous, like the one time it said that, if you want your child to not go hungry and to be clothed, then you just need to be more faithful or something. And I don't know if you remember that episode, but I was like, how awful for someone that really believes this and trying to live their life this way, but they live in sub-Saharan Africa and their kids are starving. Like they feel like they have failed in their faith. You know what I mean? So there's all kinds of things that, like, when you read it and you really think about what the ramifications can be, pretty scary, right? And I think you're pointing to one right there. And you have justification to banish your kid and kick him out because that's what God does, right? You're living up to that standard.
And I never thought about it, but God kicking out that third of hosts of heaven in the war of heaven is a horrible example of proper parenting.
Right.
He's a deadbeat dad.
Yeah, it's you would go to jail for that, right?
Right.
All right. Well, we've been talking. Man, God, this is going fast. What time it is already? So let me say this. I wanted to talk about the craziness of this whole, like, burning women and children and what the hell that was. But I also let me turn it over to you. And what do you have any questions you want to throw at me?
No, I think that
that's no fun. You gotta have some questions.
Oh, okay. What do you do for a living?
Oh.
No, I'm more curious, really, the feedback you've gotten from people.
Okay, sure.
Either from like believing members, or you've touched on it a bit with the Taylor Scholarship and people reaching out. And I guess I would kind of take it to the next question, which is, did you even think that this kind of subculture existed, whether it's Mormons or ex-Mormons, or this whole conflict about leaving Mormonism? Because from your point of view, it must look like this horribly controlling cult or, group.
Yes.
And anyone that's been raised in it, whether they're still active or not, they might have very different views about that. Like, I can see the good that came out of it.
Sure.
But a lot of people can't. And so a lot of people just refer to it as a cult, and other people review it as like, it's a religion, and that's what religions do.
Yeah, so I'll say that, I mean, just about, there are, even, I'm going to say something really controversial here, but even in the beginning, way back when, with the KKK, they were community groups that did some good things, right? I mean, they did, if you look at it historically, they did horrible things, right? Which is what they're more known for, because it was just unforgivable acts of violence that they committed. But that's not all they did, right? So it would be easy to look and say, yes, but look at what all they did for the community. It's like, well, that's irrelevant because of the evil acts that they also committed, right? Here I am. This book's wearing off of me. I'm saying evil. So yeah, first off, right off the bat, I will not ever look at any group of humans and say you are purely negative. There's nothing coming out of you but absolute, badness or evil or whatever. There's always some good that you can look at. But certainly it's, so you can either take it as which one outweighs the other, right? So in the case of the KKK, I think almost universally we all agree that the bad infinitely outweighed the good, and so that group is considered a bad group, right?
Right.
So if we look at so back to your original question though, did I know? No, I did not. So I honestly thought because I was raised around quite a few in the Christian community, and so my one set of grandparents were Presbyterian and the other were Methodist, and I knew people that went to Lutheran church, but in the end of the day we were all Christians, right? It wasn't even that different. I remember as a kid even asking like, what's the difference? And it was just kind of like, well, it's just kind of the order of things, right? In this church we sing more like slow songs from a hymn book, and in this church it's more we clap along. You know what I mean? It was just
Right.
it was subtle differences that but it was all we were all part of the same club, right? So Mormonism seems to be different. This is not. This is like no. We are alone on an island, right? And
Right.
so that I didn't realize. I thought it was just kind of like because even it's like okay, you have a different book. Well, Catholics have more books in
The
their Bible,
Apocrypha,
right?
yeah.
Right, and it doesn't make them like a completely different. Although you could argue that the whole Pope thing. Either way, but you can have if there's a Christian at a cocktail party and he bumps into someone and they say I'm Catholic, they're not just going to look at each other like, "Oh my God, you're going to hell." Like that's not the first reaction. It's like, "Oh, okay, so we believe the same thing. You just have a few different rituals." That's kind of how that relationship goes. So the fact that this was such an isolated group, I was unaware of. It first dawned on me when I did the first Mymo special, actually. When I heard some of the phrases that were being used, and I thought, people don't talk that way, right? I think it was, I feel bad. What was her name? Janie? Yeah, Janie. When she was saying, oh, sister this and Heavenly Father, and I was like, no one talks that way. So that was a bit of an eye opener. What really did it for me was when I went on the podcast Outer Darkness, and it's just a group of ex-Mormons, and so they started talking about the culture, and I swear it was like they were speaking a different language at one point. I was
Hmm.
lost. I didn't know what was going on. And I think I made the phrase that I felt like an explorer that had just landed on an alien planet, right?
Right.
And so it's like I didn't even know that this planet existed, but here I am, so I guess I'm going to learn about it, right? So it's been a real challenge for me, number one, to not go all in on that because I'm really curious about it and I really want to know more, but I also really want to stay true to this no spoiler thing, right?
Right.
I love that don't know what's happening next, and I feel like the deeper I go into that, the more will be revealed that I don't necessarily want revealed yet, right? So there's a part of me that maybe I'm burning through this thing and releasing more midweek episodes than I said I ever would, just because I want to get through it, so I can say, okay,
Well,
finally I can go in.
the joy of this is that anything you read in the Book of Mormon is going to have nothing to do with modern day Mormonism.
Yeah, I've heard that. So
Yeah.
I don't know
So,
what I'm going to do with that. Like, and seriously, the reason is because I think I will be in a bit of a unique situation that I don't know if anybody else will actually know literally everything that's in the Book of Mormon and nothing else, right? Like no other, cultural teachings and, the things that come along with it. Won't have had an instructor next to me explaining what it means. So I don't know. I've been thinking about maybe I should write some sort of book that says, how a Mormon should live according to this. You know what I mean? And just see how different that is. I don't know.
yeah,
So,
it's interesting. What I've been looking at lately, because we're in the Midwest now, is the Mormon Church was here for the longest time in the old days,
mhm.
and when Brigham Young took the people west, a number of groups stayed here. And you have the Community of Christ, which was the reorganized church, and that's the most well known. Well, an hour and a half away from us, there is one congregation. When I say us, I mean you and I, David, in
Right,
the
right.
Chicago area.
Yep.
There is a congregation of Strangites. And that was when Joseph Smith died. There was a guy saying, no, I have this letter right here that Joseph Smith said I was an ex-prophet. And then he went and took people up to Wisconsin, and then he found more plates and wrote another book and had more witnesses. And there is one congregation left, and they're an hour and a half away from us. And I'm thinking, like, I want to go visit.
Yeah.
But there are all of these Mormon, and I say Mormon meaning belief in the Book of Mormon, not LDS Church Mormon. But there are dozens of these religions all throughout America, and they are
all,
just
all offshoots from the original Joseph
well, I mean,
Smith.
yeah, and by the real scholarly definition, the Brighamite Church is also an offshoot, but they just have the most people, and so they are seen as the legitimate Mormon church. And there's a lot of marketing in there too. But
Huh.
there are, there's all sorts of people and people around here in the Midwest that are believers in the Book of Mormon in one way or the other. You got a lot in Missouri, and there's a small group living in the United Order down there too. There's like 12 of them.
Huh.
And so you just think like there is more to Mormonism than just the LDS Church when you take into account all these other groups that are around us.
Right, but the only one that I really need to take seriously, though, is the LDS Church, right?
I guess from like a popular religion point of view, yes.
Well, it's not necessarily popular, it's influence, right?
Well, influence-wise, absolutely. I mean, they're the only one with a Senate majority leader in the U.S. Senate.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it was and I think I even mentioned that during one of the, I don't know, probably one of the Isaiah chapters or something where I was just getting killed. And I went on this little tirade about how I was annoyed that I had to care about this. Mm-hmm. Because honestly, if you have a little sect of something and you have, 50 people that belong to it and they're in the middle of some small Wisconsin town, I just don't care. I don't care that you exist. I don't need to care about you, right? In the same way, and I think I even said, I don't have to care about, the teachings of Zeus, because nobody believes it. No one that believes that it has any influence. It just doesn't matter. And so, yeah, I think the reason this one does matter is because people do have influence, and so it becomes important to know, okay, well, what is it that's driving you, right? What is it that if you're going to be in charge, right? If you're going to be running things, if you're going to be making decisions about my life because you're representing me in government, then I think I should at least have an understanding of what your background, underlying motivation is, right?
Right.
So that's why I think you have to care about this, as opposed to all the different kind of sects that come out. But certainly, going back to your original question, I just didn't realize how isolated Mormons made themselves, right?
Well, they're the one true church.
Mm-hmm.
They're the only ones with the authority to do anything. And so...
so arrogant, isn't it?
Well, your baptism doesn't count, and, everything you've done, it doesn't count, because the analogy is always, if you were driving down the street and ice cream truck came up behind you and started putting on a siren, would you pull over? And if you did, and he came up and wrote you a ticket, I mean, would you respect that ticket? And this is something that would use as missionaries, and you'd say, of course we wouldn't respect it. He's an ice cream man. And you're like, right? He has no authority.
Wow.
And that's what you need is anyone can baptize, but if you don't have the authority from God, and that goes back to Melchizedek, he was the proprietor of one of the priesthoods, and so one of the two priesthoods that are being used now, we have the Aaronic priesthood and the Melchizedek priesthood, and the Melchizedek is the higher priesthood, and that is the priesthood that all men pretty much have, all the way down from missionaries all the way up to the prophet. And so, yeah, there's a whole caste system involved, and it's great fun. Boring as hell too, but yeah, it's very arrogant. It's very much we are the one true church, and it's us versus them, which is great cult thinking, and it polarizes everyone. And when I was in grad school, I was sitting there, and I was in grad school to be a therapist, and I'm sitting there with like eight or 10 people, and this woman says that she is a rabbi. And so right away I'm thinking, okay, she must be one of these very liberal, Jewish groups.
Mm-hmm.
And she says something she loves about Utah, because I was doing this in Salt Lake City. She says, this is the only place I've ever lived where I'm referred to as a Gentile.
That's hilarious.
Because the Mormons adopted the Gentile as everyone else, and we are the chosen. They won't call themselves Jews or Israelites, but they're God's people, and everyone else are the Gentiles. And that's just like the Amish. Everyone's the English, except for us. Right.
So to answer this question, you're going to be giving me big spoilers. Just tell me that. Okay. But you actually hit on an interesting point. So one of the biggest things that I think that Christianity as a whole would love to be able to go and erase out of all of their books, right? Well, I guess in the case of Christianity, their book, right, would be this whole concept of, God having a chosen race, right? And this was a nationality. This was the Israelites was his people, and the rest of the world he didn't give a crap about, right? It's just, you could go and slaughter them, you could enslave them. If you were not Israelite, you were an animal as far as the Old Testament's concerned, right? And this repeats itself time and time again. Like, people didn't even blink an eye to go slaughter women and children from another, right, tribe.
Right.
It just, they weren't them. They weren't the chosen ones. That seems to have continued, right? So even as in the Book of Mormon, I guess is what I'm saying, because now we have these Israelites. They're still God's chosen people, right? They are, when anyone kind of breaks the covenant, right, then he actually changes their skin color so that everyone will know they're a different race now, right? They're not my chosen people. And so it does still seem to be tied to this concept of nationality, well, not nationality, but lineage, right? Is that
Right.
you come from Israel. And so you just said an interesting point that I never really thought of. How is it the Gentiles can be welcomed in so open arm when up until now, at least, it's still pretty much an exclusive group just for the Israelites?
Well, the interesting thing about Mormonism, and these are things that drew me to it because it's just so different. They teach more actively 20 years ago than now that God or Jesus, two different people, Jesus, went and had his prophets, and he preached to everyone everywhere. Other lost sheep I have, which are not of this fold. So he came to America and he preached to the Nephites, which is happening eventually.
Yep.
Yeah, and then, but the common understanding is that, do you think there were only two groups of people? No, he went everywhere. And so there are these myths of, some white bearded god in Japan. And so everyone's, oh, okay. Despite the fact that it misaligns by a couple thousand years, and it was just lost some time in the history. And so Jesus went to everyone, everywhere, and, taught his gospel, and it was lost.
Oh, so the Book of Mormon is just a description of one of those people.
Correct. And the idea, and Joseph Smith used to say that these other volumes will be coming out. We will find these records. And your fundamentalist Mormon is still going to believe that, this hill here could be a burial mound. There could be plates in it.
We might have a money-making opportunity.
Well, it's been tried a few times.
Has it?
But yeah, this concept that there are more records out there, and they will come forth.
Got it.
And it's like this great, like, I keep waiting for that shoe to drop because everyone just wants it to happen. That's in the church because it's just like more vindication, but it's not going to happen.
But everyone is just assumes that, okay, if they find some plates in China, right, or Australia or India or wherever, right, that they would all expect that they're not going to say anything new, right? It's still going to be the same message from Jesus. It would just be more evidence that he existed and was appearing to people around the world.
It'll be more people, more stories, more prophets, but it's all essentially the same recycled Old and New Testament.
It'd be funny if they were found, and what Jesus said was, I just played the funniest joke ever on those Americans and told them a bunch of BS. Let's see if they actually believe it. That just would be funny, but anyway.
But yeah, and so get back to your question about race. God chose Israel for some reason, and I could be completely sound like a fool for not knowing what it is.
Well, there's no good. There's no. If anyone can justify, God's racism, good. Yeah, I don't really.
I actually
want to
do
entertain
think there is a quote in the Book of Mormon. I believe it's the Book of Mormon. Or it could just be from somewhere else. But the concept is that God had to send Jesus to the Jews because they were the only people wicked enough to kill the Son of God.
Yes, it did say that. And
so
I thought that was the funny thing was it was Jewish people saying that. And I was like, man, you guys hate yourselves.
And so that is the reason that Jesus came through that lineage. But there are other people everywhere. And so really, you are adopted into God's fold when you join his church and are baptized. And when you reach a certain age, you get your patriarchal blessing, which is just this guy, and he puts his hands on your head, and it's kind of like a psychic reading. And he pronounces your lineage.
I got to that part in your book, so I know what you're talking about.
Okay, yeah. He pronounces your lineage. And most people are going to be of the tribe of Ephraim. But every once in a while, someone becomes a tribe of Judah or Levi, I'm sorry. The different tribes of Israel. And no one really understands why or what that's supposed to mean, but it's there. And so, yeah, it's this whole concept of us being adopted into the family and the body of Christ, regardless of our actual lineage and nationality and whatnot. So I think that there is a bit of this racial superiority, but within Mormonism, it had a lot more to do with being Caucasian than anything else. But that just plays along with the American narrative.
True. Yeah. Hard. Can't whitewash over that fact.
No, it's one of those things you can't really explain away.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we are over an hour, so I think people may not be able to tolerate much more of us. So I think this might be a good time to wrap. But I want to give you an opportunity. If there's anything else that you feel like, man, if only we'd had time, I would love to have asked David.
Well, I mean, I actually think I was preparing for this by looking at Alma 14, which is the crazy chapter.
And we never even got into it.
Right. Now, I pulled out my scriptures, which I just, color-coded the hell out of on my mission. And chapter 14 was one where I had literally highlighted the entire chapter.
Okay.
Because it is such a great story. And I was trying to think, like, what's so great about it? And I write these little quotes all over. That what was great was that this was an example of the whole free will and the whole, everything we've talked about today.
Okay.
Because, if you remember Alma and Amulek, Amulek was asking Alma, shouldn't we just, like, stretch forth our superpowers and make them stop?
Right.
Killing all these women and children. And Alma says, no, the spirits told me not to let them happen. And that's based on this whole free agency thing. That God wants people to, explore their free agency and to make mistakes and to do bad things. And he's not going to step in and stop you. He's going to let you touch the hot stove to learn. And so that's why, and it was also this trial, because would Alma and Amulek allow this to happen? Well, it's God's will. God wanted them to happen, this to happen, unfortunately, because then these people got to go to heaven. And the whole point of this happening it was to try to get Alma and Amulek to deny their testimony.
Right. I get that.
I'm going to torture people, and then you're going to recant, and then everyone's going to know you're a liar. And then they didn't. And so you look at it as a believer and say, how strong was their belief in their testimony that they wouldn't even deny it after seeing all these people murdered? And so it really just becomes a very inspirational story, because not only did they have restraint and not smite these people dead, but they never denied what they knew to be true.
Well, now I'm afraid everything you said up until that, they had the strength to not smite them dead. No, they did.
Well, eventually.
Okay.
Yeah, there was that whole point at the end after 12 days in prison of being whipped that they just like stretched forth their hand and the entire prison fell.
Actually, I don't think it was 12. It didn't say how many days they were there. It said the 12th day of the 10th month. Because I remember at first when it said after 12 days, and I assumed it meant 12, but then it said 10th month, and I was like, oh, this is just a date. Anyway, sorry, semantics.
Yeah. So it's regardless. Eventually, they just stretched forth their hand and everyone died. But that was after everyone made their choice.
Yeah. But it is funny. But your point earlier about God doesn't intervene, right?
Mm-hmm.
Unless he wants to kill people, then he intervenes like crazy.
Yeah, pretty much. Or if, in Joseph Smith's case, if he wants, Joseph Smith to have a few extra wives.
Well, we'll get to that. That might be, you're getting dangerously close to spoilers, so I'm going to...
Well, no, that's not anywhere in the Book of Mormon, so you're fine.
All right, well, bummer. Well, Matthew, this has been a lot of fun for me. I think you really did help clear up quite a bit. And yeah, and I will say to some of the detractors that say I'm somewhat cowardly because I won't have a discussion with an actual Mormon, right? Everyone I bring on the show seems to be ex-Mormon, or even shows that I go on are shows with ex-Mormons. So one thing I'll say is that no one's volunteered. So if there is any believing Mormons on the show that would like to have a dialogue like this, I'll do it. I don't want to get into a, apologetic, counter-apologetic type of argument, right? Because right. I don't want the show to turn into that. There's a lot of shows like that. It's, I don't want us to necessarily have some formal debate, premise one, right? But, I wouldn't mind discussing it. So if there's any people that really believe this stuff, that think that, I'm just missing some key elements and you could help, then let me know. So it's not, I'm not avoiding that. It just hasn't been offered.
I had the exact same thing happen about 10 years ago when, I don't know if you're familiar with West Coast radio at all, But Kevin and Bean, they work at K-Rock, the biggest rock station in California, whatever.
Okay.
They had their segment called Aska, and they wanted to ask a Mormon. But they determined that they could not actually get a real Mormon on there that would give legitimate answers. Because there's whitewashing, there's protecting, there's, pushing things under the rug, there's explaining things away. And so I went on the show as an ex-Mormon to explain things from a Mormon's point of view. And that's, because they could not find either a Mormon who would volunteer or that they felt would be honest in their answers. So I don't know. I don't really think honesty is a problem. I do think oftentimes communication's an issue because of the different vocabulary.
Right.
And, just things like that.
Well, yeah, because I think there's oftentimes when you're in the group, right, and you say terms that just, I don't know, holistically make sense. So you can say things like righteous, and I will just look and say, well, what does that mean? And I don't think anyone's ever asked them that before. What do you mean? Define righteousness? It's like, yeah. How do you define righteousness? How do I know if I'm righteous or not? And then it feels like they're being attacked, right?
Right.
And this is by the way not just a Mormon thing. I've had these type of conversations with Christians, and I'm not doing it to try and attack. I'm not doing it to try to twist them up in their words. It's that I legitimately am trying to understand their worldview, and you have to ask those questions, right? When someone says like, well, all men have sinned, and I say, well, what is a sin? And it's like, anything that takes you further from God. I'm like, what does that mean? It's like, there's just no way to define it. And that's like, unless you can give me a set of, like, here is the definitive set of rules from the Bible, which just doesn't exist, right? They're all over the place. Then you can't really define it. And so it's like, and that's what I want to know. And it's interesting that people quickly become defensive. Like, why are you trying to argue me about this? I'm like, I'm trying to understand it, and I don't know how else I can understand it without asking you these questions.
This is very reminiscent of when I was learning Filipino to go on my mission while I was there. Eventually you hit this point where you don't have to sit there and ask, what does that word mean? What does it mean? What does it mean? I have to look it up in the dictionary, because you start doing what's called circular learning, and you hear a word and you understand it, but you get the context. And so then you can start using it. And so I can pick up words that don't exist in English for that reason and use them in Filipino, but I can't explain necessarily what something means to an English speaker. And so when you join Mormonism or you're in that culture, while it is English, there are certain words: sin, righteousness, faith, repentance. Repentance, it's pretty easy, but all these other ones, they mean different things to them. And you cannot explain them in a non-religious setting because there might not be words that adequately describe what it means, or they were just learned circularly. They never really figured out what the definition is.
Right.
But they can use it in a sentence and they understand it, but there is no real way to quantify what sin is.
Right. And I usually end up I can get people to admit that it's probably more of an emotion, right? So kind of something that you do that you feel guilty for after, right? Like if you're going to commit an act that will cause you to feel guilt, that's probably a sin, and everyone kind of agrees. And it's like, I'm just telling you, I feel guilty for a lot less than you do, and it doesn't make me a bad person, right? So I absolutely, if I do something and later find out that action had harmed someone else in any way, I mean, even just emotional harm, I feel awful. And I will do everything I can to make it up to him, right? Because I just think I'm a decent human being, and that's how I feel. And I'm going to say, what can I do for you? I feel so bad, right? In that sense, I would have felt like, if you want to define it that way, I sinned. But I feel like I don't need the blood of the lamb to come redeem me. I can redeem myself, right? I can go and make amends and make that right again, So that's my view. But I gotta be honest with you. If I'm doing something that's not hurting anybody else, and it's not causing me any great harm, I'm not gonna feel guilty about it the next day. You know what I mean?
Right.
It wouldn't occur to me to feel guilty. And so when I say that to people, and I say, so is it not a sin? Certain things that are sin for you may not be a sin for me. And they're like, no, you're missing the point. And that's where we get lost, right? It's like you're trying to define sin as a universal thing. And I'm saying I think maybe it's subjective, right? And we always get lost in that conversation. We're going to go on for hours, Tim.
Right.
Tim, you're not Tim. You're Timion.
Got it for years.
Matthew.
Some call me Tim.
Sorry about that. But anyway, I think this is a pretty good place to stop. This was a great conversation, and I'll be honest. If there's people out there that just thought this was the most entertaining thing and engaging and enlightening thing that you've ever heard, maybe Matt and I'll do this more often. Maybe we kind of hit on a good dynamic here of just being able to converse about this stuff. So if you want to hear more of this, let me know. Or even, Matt, I don't know if you are Prophet Matt, sorry, if you want to give out your contact info, if anyone wants to reach you directly, that's fine. If you don't want to, I'll just even cut that out so it's not awkward. But
if you want to contact me, send David an email and he can forward it on.
Oh, making me do all the work. Thanks.
Yep,
That's great.
Absolutely. Yep.
All right. Well, anyway.
Or you can buy my book and pray about it, and you'll know how to contact me.
Anybody that wants a signed copy of Matthew's book, let me know. Huh?
Yeah, how about that?
How about that?
Yeah, I got a couple just sitting here.
There you go. I mean, they cost 3 times as much to have them signed, but what are you going to do?
Only 3, yeah.
All right. Well, with that being said, I think we're going to close this one for now. Thank you so much, Prophet Matthew. This was a lot of fun for me, and hopefully we were able to do it again sometime.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. With that being said, we'll be back again soon to tackle the Book of Alma because it's never going to end. And so for now, goodbye.
This song is licensed for use within this podcast. All song and copyright information can be found at www.mybookofmormonpodcast.com.